Welcome everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks for being here. My name is Laura Gay, and I work with the National Native Children's Trauma Center, and we have the privilege of being part of the Capacity Building Center for Tribes. I'm a social worker by trade, and my background for the last 15 years has been in child welfare work. I wanted to take a moment to thank our federal sponsors at the Children's Bureau and the Capacity Building Center for Tribes leadership and their efforts to make this presentation possible today. We're going to be talking about trauma-informed practice strategies as they pertain to the transitions that youth make in foster care. But before we begin, let's take a moment and really center ourselves. This work is so deeply personal and most likely weighs on many of us in a very heavy way. So let's take a moment, if you wouldn't mind joining me in this. And centering yourself. All right. So wherever you're seated or wherever you are, get comfortable and feel your feet on the ground. If they're on the ground, feel your bottom in your seat, wherever that might be. And go ahead. And if you are comfortable, close your eyes. And um, I want you to picture someplace that brings you peace and wherever that might be. And as you can see that place, I want you to take in the sights. And I want you to take in the smells and the sounds. And when you're ready, if you could just take three slow and deliberate breaths with me, in through your nose and out through your mouth, and really pay attention to filling your stomach first and feeling it expand, and then how your chest rises and falls. So we'll go in through our nose, out through our mouth, in through our nose, out through our mouths. And again. All right. And as you're ready, go ahead and open your eyes and come back to the place we're in now from the place that you were with your eyes closed. Thank you for doing that. Our speakers today are Lisa Stark and Alan Rabideau, and I'm going to pass it over to them to introduce themselves here.
I'll go first, Lisa. Bonjour, everyone. My name is Alan Rabadoo. I am the Youth and Family Engagement Specialist for the National Native Children's Trauma Center. I've only been there a couple of years now, but for many years, I probably know a lot of people even on the call. I was an independent consultant, but we'll talk more about, I think, my history here a little bit later. I'm just happy to be here and share some of my experiences as a foster parent.
Bonjour, Ginoa. My name is Lisa. I am Bad River Ojibwe from northern Wisconsin. I am currently in Missoula, Montana, and as Alan said, we'll share more of our background history, but I am excited to be here today and glad that all of you can join.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Alan. So over the course of the next hour, we're going to be talking about the importance of trauma-informed transitions for children and youth in foster care. We hope to really answer the question of why does it matter that programs and caseworkers use trauma-informed policies and practice strategies when planning for transitions. We're going to hear from Lisa, a former tribal child welfare professional, and Alan, a former foster parent, about strategies that they use to build safety, to honor identity, and to elevate the voices of the youth that they worked for over the course of their careers and just throughout their lives. Today is going to include really frank conversation about the trauma experiences that many tribal youth face in the foster care system. We're also going to be open and honest about the impact that this work has on the professionals, on you all that are out there taking care of youth who have experienced trauma and hardship. So take care of yourself. If you need to step away, please do so. If you need to talk to someone you trust, please do that. And never hesitate to reach out to one of the national resource lines listed on this slide here. Your well-being really does matter, and we want you to know that it's okay if you need help and it's okay to ask for help. So, more often than not, caregivers experience a multitude of feelings and emotions when their child's removed from their care. While they might not directly say it, feelings of shame, fear, guilt, and sadness are present, even though a parent might be responsible for neglectful and abusive behavior towards the child. It's common for a child to absorb the feelings and emotions of their parents. So children often think that they did something wrong, right? If they had just been better, if they had not disclosed the abuse, that perhaps their family would still be intact. Um, Children have to then take these feelings and these emotions, their confusions, their multitude of questions, and take those with them as they transition into a temporary home. So being mindful of trauma experiences from the beginning will help caseworkers decrease negative effects that a child may experience during those various transitions that come with being in foster care. So, common transitions that children involved in the tribal child welfare system experience are during removal, that transition away from their home, away from their parents that they love, regardless of the circumstances. Then there's that transition into placement where they have a new caregiver. Hopefully, it's with a relative or someone that they know already. But regardless, this is a new home, new people to get to know, new rules, and routines that they have to learn. What we also know is that the emotions we described earlier are often exemplified for youth who experience multiple placements and have to do this again and again and again. A transition that's often overlooked is that of returning home. Perhaps this is because the family has been it's what the family's been working so hard towards, and their excitement around this and relief that this period of trial has somewhat come to a conclusion for their family. And it's important to remember that while this may be true, what is also true is that youth are now coming back into a space where they have been harmed and will experience a wide array of emotions, learning to navigate their new but yet very familiar environment. And these are just some of the major transitions we talk about that youth in care experience, but there are many others. So I was hoping you all would be willing in the chat box to type in some of the other transitions that youth that you have worked with and are currently working with experience that you plan for, that you want to be thoughtful around. What are some of those other transitions that youth go through while in the foster care system? Oh, Esther, I love that. Transitions to online and virtual schooling, aging out of foster care, a very big transition, middle school to high school, moving and working with different people. Absolutely. Right. Sometimes the very location, like the town, the neighborhood, the community that they're used to shifts. Having reunification breakdown and having to go back into placement into a hospital setting or um, uh, group home care. Absolutely. Going from being in a rural setting to urban. These are all really, really thoughtful transitions that youth experience really regularly when they're involved in the system. And I'm hoping grief and loss. I love these. They're scrolling in, and it's hard for hard for me not to look and respond to each of those. What we're hoping to do today is talk a little bit about these different transitions and some key pieces to consider. Thank you for participating in that. So let's keep the conversation going, right? Lisa and Alan are here today in dual roles, really. Alan as a national expert on family engagement with extensive lived experience as a foster parent, and Lisa as an expert on trauma and resiliency across tribal communities with American Indian and Alaska Native children and youth, with also the lived experience as a tribal child welfare caseworker and supervisor. So I'm looking forward to learning from you all today. And as a reminder for you participants out there, if you have questions for Lisa and Alan, we really hope to be able to answer those as we move through the training. So please if you wouldn't mind putting those in the Q&A box, that'll be a little easier for us to track and manage and make sure we're getting to where the chat box goes a little bit faster than I can read sometimes. So please put your questions for Lisa and Alan into the Q&A box. And if we don't get to them during the course of the training, we also have some dedicated time at the end for open questions and question time. So know that we will do our best to get to you. Okay. So Alan, would you tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to becoming a foster parent?
Sure. So I actually live in northern Michigan. I am a citizen of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa here in northern Michigan. I live here. I get the honor of working for the National Native Children's Trauma Center from home. I might be catching a cold or something, so forgive the cracking voice. So it's been some years now, but when I was young, I was recruited to work in a co-ed group home, working with, tribal youth that had substance abuse problems. And I was just a direct care staff worker and had the opportunity to work. I mean, I started off working night shifts, just kind of cleaning around the house and doing bed checks every 15 minutes. And then I was given some opportunity to kind of then transition into like a addiction counselor. I got, back then I was able to do some counseling and get some of my credentials. I thought I was bound for social or for engineering and stuff like that because I was a really good math science person. Somehow I got sucked into human services and I never was able to get out. Like I've been in social work ever since I was like, might as well go back. I was 18 years of age working in that group home. So over the years, I just kind of, when that group home unfortunately had to close down, I moved back here to Sault Ste. Marie and worked in the school system as an intervention specialist, and then eventually worked as a manager of another boys' home. I was like a live-in. I had my little apartment downstairs. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Boys and Girls Town, Boys Town kind of thing. It was an affiliate to them. So I was a live-in manager and worked in this home. And then eventually I moved into administration, became like their trainer and evaluator. So I just kind of moved up the ladder, but I kind of missed that direct care work. So I had this crazy idea, well, what would it be like to take one of these youth into my home as a foster parent, right? So that was one of the influences. The other influence that I think really influenced me was my mother being a Anishinaabe woman said that, hey, it's your responsibility to help raise the boys in the community. So it's kind of, within our tribal culture, our tribal teachings to open our homes to the young men and women that had no place to go, say, or homeless, or, so my mother was a big supporter of doing like foster care work. So that's really, I mean, just didn't have any plans to end up here, but, it's been 30 years now of doing this work. And yeah, I love the hands-on working directly with the youth. So why not open my home to 4 troubled youth at any given time, 4. I couldn't go to 5 because that would have been a group home, right, Lisa? I think it's the most rules, but yeah. So I always had 4 boys living with me over the years. And so I claimed one, I like adopted one, my oldest son. I adopted, and it's been some years since I've done foster care. Being a trainer, technical assistance person, I travel so much, I can't do foster care, but yeah, so we're bringing back some great memories.
Thank you, Alan. I just have to say I'm personally grateful that the social work world sucked you in. So Lisa, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to tribal child welfare work?
I've had like a non-traditional route into tribal child welfare. While I was an undergrad, I began working in a Native American home for runless and homeless youth in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I just fell in love with working with youth. from there, I taught at a inner city alternative school for Native youth for 2 years, 7th through 12th graders. And after that, I went into criminal defense work. I was a criminal defense investigator and the American Indian community worker, meaning that I was a liaison between the American Indian community and our attorneys. And I just fell in love with that work as well. And we would take on a lot of juvenile justice cases, work with a lot of youth and even adults and families. And I just always loved kind of like the social work aspect of it all. When I was in my 30s, I decided that I needed to go to grad school and went to the University of Minnesota, Duluth. I saw someone from here, so woohoo, go Bulldogs. And while I was doing my graduate work, that's when I also started at my tribe, Bad River in northern Wisconsin, and I was a caseworker and ICWA representative. Doing that full-time and full-time grad school was a challenge, but I did it. And then I moved to work for the Lakota tribe in northern Wisconsin as well. I became a supervisor, ICWA representative, and still had carried my own caseload. But in working in both tribes, we worked to licensed foster homes. As a worker, I was always in the homes, checking on our youth in care. I was meeting with our foster parents. So I have a lot of experience with that. And in the state of Wisconsin, I also worked with other tribal child welfare directors, and we met quarterly, and we would work on a lot of policies in regards to kids in foster placement as well. So, miigwech.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, I am excited to get to hear from you both today. I think it's just going to be a really good time of just conversation. So for those of you out there with questions, please do ask them, because we're hoping that this can become a conversation as though we weren't on Zoom, but around a table. So one of the things that we talk about when we think trauma-informed strategies, trauma-informed approaches, what are they? What does it look like? How do we know we're doing them? One of the foundational principles is building physical and psychological safety. So when we're in this conversation, I think we're talking really about the youth and about the transitions that happen. But Lisa, thinking about the different transitions youth on your caseload experience, what are some strategies that you use to support that physical and psychological safety through their transitions?
It was always important to me to give the youth that I was working with voice and choice. A lot are powerless and have a lot of adults making decisions about their life or their life situations, and giving them the opportunity when it was appropriate or when we were able to have voice and choice. It empowers them, and also I think helps with transition and building relationships of trust with the youth.
What a powerful thing, right? I think when we think of kids in care, they often can't be involved in the decision-making process on their own safety, right? But what can they be involved in, and where can their voices be heard? I love that. Alan, what about you? For youth that were coming into your home and then eventually youth who were going out of your home, what did you do to create safety for them?
It's always exciting to have a new young man coming into the home for a while. I guess I was privileged with working for a boys and girls town program where the goal was always reunification. So I never once kind of had these boys coming home with this understanding that I'm going to raise them for the rest of their life or anything like that, right? So it was always they're going to go back home. So But it was always exciting when they were coming into the home because, you know, if you think about it, as the foster parent, I always thought, well, okay, so I can take this approach that as soon as they walk in that door, I'm gonna lay the law down, right? It's like, here's how it works, and this is how you get this, and this is how you get that. I think, you know, you learn really quickly that that don't work. And right from the get-go, you have to understand that, yeah, it is a very traumatic experience coming into the home. And so just, you know, spending that, devoting that and that beginning time with them to sit down and just explain, okay, how things work around the house, what my expectations are, you know, where they'll be sleeping, you know, this is, you know, don't be afraid to, you know, you can use the bathroom, you don't need permission to, you know, here's kind of the rules and that kind of thing. But one trick that I really enjoyed was that I also kind of told them that my responsibility is to help you get back home or wherever you want to go, whatever your goal is, right? That voice and choice, at least talks about. I always used to ask them, you know, say, so, you know, I can help you. Is there something I can help you with? Like, can I help you, you know, improve your relationship with your parents? Can I help you, you know, become better at a sport? What is it that, you know, I could do for you while you're here? Like, you know, let them pick a goal, something that they could do. And whatever I can do to, again, empower them. Because again, I think the more powerless you feel, the more, of course, you know, traumatic the experience is. So, you know, there's always those discussions about like, you know, they were used to sleeping with a fan on, you know, so, okay, so we need to go get you a fan. You know, it's like, there was a lot of running around, I remember that first day, because you tried to make them feel the most comfortable that you could in your home. And of course, I mean, there was limits too. I mean, if they said every night before I go to bed, I get a filet mignon steak or something like that, like maybe I couldn't provide that, but okay, you know, like you do what the best that you can to kind of, like you said, meet their needs. You know, but the other thing too, and I was looking, just thinking about this. We talk about youth transition, but the biological parents, you know, them too, I think it's important because it's traumatic for them. I was also like, I always made sure that I made immediate contact with them, told them who I was, you know, like you can call here, here's the number, you can stop by, here's what my schedule is kind of like, you know. So it's really about building that familiarity, not only with the youth that's coming into the home, but the biological parents, if they still have, you know, visitation or whatever. Of course, within whatever the restrictions are. Just make sure the parents have that empowerment here too. I know we get to talk a little more about voice and choice later. So, but it's, yeah, that's really what it's all about, is, you know, eliminating this idea that, you know, you're in this unfamiliar place and you want to do whatever it takes to make them feel comfortable. So, good.
These are all great examples. I'm kind of curious from your guys' experience, if what were some markers that helped you know that a youth was feeling physically safe, psychologically safe? And then kind of on the flip side of that, were there markers that told you, okay, this youth isn't feeling safe right now? And what sort of things did you do when you kind of came up against that? If you have thoughts on that.
I was fortunate to work in, you know, like two pretty small communities where everybody kind of knows everyone. So generally I would know the youth even before them coming into, you know, the system. It's just getting to really spend the time and knowing your youth and your kids. I remember like my son once told me, he was talking about me being a social worker, and he was saying, Mom, I understand that you're my mom, and sometimes I have to share you because you're not just a mom to us, you're a mom to all. Because he knows even with children who I didn't give birth to, I can be a mama bear. I deeply care about any youth that I work with. And I would just advocate and treat each youth as if they were my own, or if they were my nieces or nephews, is how I like to look at it. but just knowing what their baseline is and seeing what the if they were, like, if they would drastically change from that, or just constantly checking in with the youth. I've been known to like contact the foster parents and say, hey, can I actually pick up Joe today from school? Just, so I can give him a ride home and just kind of spend the time, like talking and checking in, like how they're doing. And often that was how I would check in.
That windshield time is such a powerful thing, right? We talk about that all the time, that there's a level of intimidation that comes with like sitting down and having a conversation with where there's kind of an agenda of what needs to be talked about and things we need to check in on. But I just think there's something powerful about getting into a car with someone and going for a drive and seeing what comes out when there is a less of a to do for the conversation and more of how's it going. There's not that like kind of directness. You're side by side, you've leveled the power. Okay, Lisa, my next question for you, and I have to ask it, though it's a little off topic. So for you to be a mama bear to so many kids in the community, and many of which were experiencing pain and heartache, how did you take care of yourself as you took care of so many people who were experiencing that pain?
I really relied on my own like cultural traditions, sweat lodges, prayers, smudging. That was always very important to me. If I was having extremely rough days, I would ask like a close friend or even my husband to like clean me off, which means using smudge, eagle feathers, eagle fans, and just kind of like wiping down. Or I would talk to other of my professionals because, like your coworkers do become your family. Even though I have been out of child welfare for about a year and a half now, I still think about the kids that I work with. So it definitely has impacted me. I'm still wondering how they're doing and worry about them, because even when cases close or I left child welfare direct service, I still carry that and wanting to know that they're okay and they're making it and thriving it, and that care doesn't end when the case closes.
Thank you, Lisa. Hey, Alan, we got a question from you that came in from the audience, if you will. So
Yeah.
it says, have you ever been in a position where you were not in agreement with the case plan or services being offered to the youth? How did you navigate that situation?
Wow. Okay. So, yeah, I was telling the other day, I said after talking about some of these experiences, I might need trauma therapy myself afterwards. But, yeah, so there was situations with different caseworkers where, I think I had shared a story with somebody one time where a caseworker would come into a home and then disagree with whatever consequence I had, kind of, overstep or change something. That was that's a very difficult thing to manage. I think the problem there was, okay, so I was once referred to as, he's the foster parent, he's our employee or employee. Yeah, I received some funding to work with these children, but I never considered myself an employee. Like, I live with these kids 24/7. You're their caseworker. We have to hash out, what's best for the child, because I live with them every day. I see things every day that you don't necessarily see, although I try to report as much as I can. So it really is just understanding that you got a child, you got biological parents, you got the legal parent. Now you got me, the foster parent, who's, parenting the child. And it's just, all of us have to realize that, things are going to take, okay, so there's multiple people trying to make a decision, right? It's never easy. So I had to at times compromise. I had to give times, and then other times I had to put my fist down and say, I'm sorry, like I live with this child 24/7. I'm the one that brought him to the hospital to drink charcoal because he OD'd on some, drug that he got from school. Like I deal with this stuff. So you gotta give a little bit here too. So right, give and take, give and take. That's the only way you can handle it. No easy answer, no easy way. I don't think there's that, there's a best way to do it. It's everybody needs to understand that there's multiple opinions and voices and people involved. Hope that answers that question.
Thanks, Alan. Okay. So thinking about how we can promote a youth's identity, whether that's whatever component of identity that is, their culture, their race, their connection to various activities across the community, their gender identity, the history that they've experienced, that their family has experienced. So Lisa, you've told me a lot about the diversity of kids that you've cared for as a caseworker. What are some of the ways that you've supported and honored that diversity as they made various transitions while they were involved in the foster care system?
While I was a student at University of Minnesota Duluth, every year they would put on a conference for tribal child welfare in particular. And they had a First Nation social worker come from Canada. He is a fluent speaker, and he talked about like what his experience is. He traditional, and talked about how to meld, like our culture into the work that we do. And one of the things that he said is when you are a caseworker, it is your responsibility to protect and maintain a child's tribal identity from the time, like whether it's birth or the time they come into your care, and preserving that as best as you can. And I've always tried to instill that in all of my practice. I come, in the two communities that I've worked in, there are, like a lot of traditional people, a lot of ceremonies, and there are a lot of children who came into our care that I knew their families were traditional as well. And just maintaining what the cultural norm is for the children and the families, or even encouraging the children and families to begin learning about culture and traditions and ceremonies, and being kind of like the auntie or a relative who can help them in that way, and to bring them into that community of love and healing and supports as well. Just a lot of the things that I have done is I've done things on the macro level. So policy wise with states, I see like a former, like a colleague, Jill, is on here. She's an ombudsman from the state of Minnesota for Indian child welfare cases. I would often reach out to her when I was seeing issues or problems in our ICWA cases that were centered in Minnesota. But just working with policy changes as large as, like we need to change state laws, or as minimal as, local policies, as you cannot cut a child's hair that's in your care without consulting or getting permission from the parents, because that became like a big issue in foster care or out of home placement. But always just trying to maintain what their identity is, or even teaching them what their identity is always been important.
Thanks, Lisa. You have a question here coming in. Let me make sure I'm reading the right one. What are your ideas for non-native caregiver to keep a child culturally connected with the child's tribe? What are some of the biggest challenges when placing a child in a non-native home?
So I have supervised and worked right along with non-tribal coworkers, and we just always had like a balance of knowing, like we would constantly teach our staff, what they need to know. But if it's out of their realm or capability, they would rely on the coworkers who were familiar and we could take that on. So it's just working with staff, but it's really knowing the community that you work in. It's really important to know what the culture and the traditions and the beliefs are. Especially in Indian country, there's a lot of differences, hey? Even just in regions, like for instance, like in northern Wisconsin where I worked would be drastically different than, like a worker or a community in Arizona. The traditions and the culture will be different, even though there'll be some that are the same. There's different ways of believing and doing and practicing and living. So that was there other part of the question?
So what are some ideas you have for a non-native caregiver to keep a child culturally connected? So what are some of your ideas to support that caregiver?
We always encourage like our staff is to attend community events in tribal communities, whether it's just like school events, even sports events or cultural events like powwows or round dances, or even, if they were able to come and participate in ceremonial as well, just to get an understanding. That's part of being like, cultural humility versus cultural competence. It's actually, the difference is kind of doing, but knowing where the boundaries are.
Thanks, Lisa. So Alan, a similar question for you. You've really cared for hundreds of youth, right? And your experience in group home settings and as a foster parent. So what did you do to learn about each youth's identity and culture? And what are ways that you found to support those identities?
Yeah, thanks. I was listening to Lisa talking, I was thinking about, boy, all the different situations where, because I was licensed by, what do you call it? A nonprofit, like a private agency. I wasn't always licensed within tribal license anyway. So I've had both tribal and even had non-tribal youth come through the home. Like you said, working as a manager of a group home, I've had hundreds of youth that I guess I worked with. Yeah, everybody's so different and unique, and it's really that first day, spending all that time with them and just letting them tell their stories and listening and talking to them about what's important and what's not important. And I mean, I would even do I don't want to promote one of NNCT's trainings, but we're working on a curriculum right now called Walking the Four Directions, which is kind of like a curriculum for parents, by parents, for foster parents, by foster parents, using the medicinal teachings. Anyways, there's in that training we talk about these surveys, like just asking the kid, what do you like, what don't you, what would you like, who do you like to spend time with, what are your favorite hobbies? There's surveys that you can do with them, spending a lot of time talking to them. But being a tribal person, and I like to consider myself fairly traditional, I mean, in my home, there's always been, the smudges and stuff like that right there in visible sight. And if they ask me about it, I answer, but I don't force that upon anybody, right? Or the other thing I thought, I always had the privilege of having multiple kids in the home. If a child came in the home, they're going to go towards their peers first, and so some of the other youth in the home would say, hey, Alan's a great guy, he takes us to powwows every weekend, like if you want to go to a powwow, you got to come with us, kind of thing. So yeah, I've had youth of very different, I guess, stage of cultural awareness, from youth that were Native American that's never been to a powwow, to youth that come in the home with their full regalia, ready to go dancing every weekend. So I loved, that was some of the best memories of my foster care years, was hitting Powell Highway with the foster boys and going around. And I had a couple of boys that like knew nothing about it. And they're like, like, where do I sit? What do I do? Am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to do that? So just expose them to it. Never once though said you have to, if one of you said, I don't want to go to a powwow, then if we were going to a powwow that weekend, I'd have to find respite, or they would go home for a home visit or whatever, right? So it was always kind of meeting them where they're at, but continuously exposing them. I mean, I'd love to take my computer and show you my house right now, but I got wolves and eagles and stuff hanging around. So like you get those questions, they come in the home, they're like, well, why do you have so many wolves hanging on your wall? Well, let me sit down and tell you about the wolves, So yeah, so even my home was set up to kind of like give them that experience. That help, Laura?
I love that. Thank you. I just think you both have spoken to like how each child, each family that they come from are so unique, and that there's not kind of one scripted trauma informed response to support their identities. And really, what does that approach, what is our way of being that encourages youth to, of course, continue the practices that they're engaged in, but also explore new ones and try them on and see if that resonates with them as they grow up and start to identify who it is that they are. So thank you. Okay, so Alan, I'm going to put this question back to you.
Sure.
Because Lisa touched on it a bit, but feel free to jump in here too, Lisa. But as a foster parent, what were ways that you promoted the youth's voice and choice? And what are ways that you supported the parents' voice and choice?
Yeah, the biological parents.
Biological, yeah.
Yeah, I shared when we were planning for this webinar, and I shared with them. Now, I used to always tell my boys, you're some of the luckiest kids in the world, because you have 3 or 4 sets of parents. You have your biological parents, which is mom, dad, whatever. Then you have legal parents, which unfortunately might be the state or the court or whatever, looking after you. And then you have me, your parenting parent, who's currently the one responsible to take care of you. So like, I wish your Christmases would be great, because you should have 3 presents under the tree from every parent. You should get all these dinners. But I always tell the boys that, that I'm your parenting parent. So my role is a little bit different than your biological parent. So in other words, my goal is to, if they were trying to get back home, then that's what I did. I worked with them to get them back there, So I shared the example earlier about letting them pick a goal that they wanted to work on. Like, I'm here to help you. Like, I had one young man that really, really wanted his driver's license, and that took a lot of work. And I don't want to go into the details, but we'll get him his driver's license, or whatever. So you give them whatever you can provide. You give them that ability to pick their own goals. I was really big into like social skills teaching. So I would always tell the kids that, it's my job here to make you successful. So we play games like, how do you accept no for an answer? How do you follow instructions appropriately? How do you accept criticism from an adult or authority figure? So I would teach those skills to them, and always reminding them that, this is going to benefit you, because it's going to give you that sense, it's going to give you, it's going to empower you as an adult. Like, my goal is to make you feel like you're going to be successful. You're going to get that good job. You're going to be successful with future employers, future bosses. Now, remember, I'm working with primarily pre-adolescents up. So this probably wouldn't apply to a 5-year-old, but I always think of that. There's a medicine teaching around that we use around that children need, or the people have a need for belonging, generosity, independence, a sense of power and control are like the 4 things. And I always think about, if I'm going to teach, if I'm going to impose a rule upon the child, then I want them to understand that it's because I want them to feel like they belong, or I want them to feel like they have power and control, that they, that they're enjoying things, because those are needs that they have. It was never about what was going to make my life easier. It's always about what's going to make your life easier. And once they understood that, then then I could say, okay, so what do you think is a fair consequence when you don't come home on time, you know? What do you think is a fair reward when you do come home on time, you know? So like letting them pick their rewards and consequences. I mean, I guess sometimes they'd be a lot harder on themselves than I ever would be. Like, you know, if I come home late, you should like ground me for 2 months. It's like, oh my goodness, like that's what their choice is. I'll give them their choice. Of course, it never worked out to be 2 months, but you know, wherever I could empower them. Biological parents, that was a hard one too, because, you know, I spent a lot of time trying to remind the biological parents that I wasn't against them. I understand child welfare gets icky. The child's in my home for a reason. I always wanted the parents to understand that, hey, I'm on your side. Because I used to love doing respite. When these boys would go back home, if their parents called and said, hey, I can't handle my son this week and come get him, I would love the opportunity if I could to go get him and let them come back and stay with me for the weekend, you know, to support them. But, you know, I kept the parents involved right from the very beginning. And I'm going to use this darn story. Everybody's heard it from me. When the kids would ask me, they'd say, I have a headache, can I have a Tylenol? I would always say, go call your mom and ask her if it's okay for you to take a Tylenol. Like any chance I had to keep the biological parent involved in the child's life, I took it, you know. Same thing now, schools give you access to the kids' grades and everything online. You know, you share that with the biological parents, you know. There's just so many ways. They're living in your home, but you're the parenting parent, so you have your list of responsibilities, but they're still the biological parent that still have a need to give permission, to understand what's going on, you know. One boy asked one time if he could have a really drastic haircut. I'm like, you need to call your parent, you know, because maybe they want your hair, you know, that way. So yeah, any way that you can.
Those are all really great examples. And it just like reminds me that developmentally, foster care system or not, adolescents are working on you know, figuring out figuring out how to make decisions, figuring out what the natural consequences are when they make a decision that you know, didn't produce the outcome that they were looking for. So like all those opportunities you're mentioning about just giving kids a chance to put into practice their critical thinking, their decision-making skills, and deal with the outcome, respond to the outcome, whether it's what they were hoping for or something slightly different. And I just so appreciate your philosophy and approach to that, the work you were doing alongside the biological parents, right, to support that safety and the wellness of the child that you both care for, right? So I guess one of my questions would be, what do you say to, let's see, what do you say to say a foster parent who is reluctant or resistant to working with birth families, perhaps because it's embedded in this, but they hurt the child. So we need to create some of this separation until they've done everything that they need to do and whatnot. What would you say to foster parents or perhaps caseworkers who kind of come from that vantage point versus that collaborative one that you've talked about?
Is that directed at me? No, me first. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't always, I mean, I guess there was, I mean, my oldest son, I pretty much adopted because unfortunately parental rights were terminated and he was never going to return home. Right. So it's a long story. He stayed as part of my family and, you know, that's where it was. I've had other kids that, you know, had to unfortunately age out of the foster home, you know, and do whatever I can to help them transition into apartment or whatever. But there was also a lot of great programs for those transitioning kids, I believe, out of the foster home. So yeah, reunification wasn't always the issue, or always the case, and in some cases they weren't even allowed to have contact with biological parents. But there was always some kind of, I would hope there was always, or for me, it was important for me to make sure that the youth know that there was a plan for permanency somewhere, right? If it's going to be with me, if it's going to be with a kinship provider, you know, so again, here's where you're going, here's what we need to do to prepare you to get there, right? We're going to make your transition, you know, into my home. You stay here for a while, you learn these all skills. We work with the people, then we transition, we make that as comfortable as possible. Ask as many questions as you need to. If I don't know the answer, I'll get the answer. It's just understanding that and just always being prepared to answer that question. And that's unfortunate when a child doesn't know, where am I going next? That was a hard one, and I have to admit that the best that I every time I could, I would be asking the worker, whoever, so what is the permanency plan for this guy? And I love the fact that I end up with, I still have some young men that call me dad that, they're not my biological children, but I was dad because they grew up in my home, and then left and others came in. So, yeah. So the answer is okay. Is that something?
Yeah, thank you. What a gift, Alan, to be called dad by so many people.
I know, eh? It's also really hard though on birthdays and Christmas. No, I'm still paying cell phone bills and helping them get their rent for the month, so it gets expensive.
I bet. All right. So I think this is a good time to open it up for questions from you all in the audience. So we do have a couple stacking up in the Q&A box that we can start with, but I also wanted to let you all know that you can unmute yourself and ask directly if you'd like. So I guess while you guys are locating that mute button, let me pull from one of these questions in the queue here. Alan, we're trying to recruit more Native families to become foster care providers. What do you now know that you wish you knew when you first became a provider?
Mute. Sorry, I didn't mute. I realize I have a room full of caseworkers and stuff here. I always said that it wasn't the kids that was hard to work with. It was hard to work with the systems. There's so many rules and so many systems are so siloed and stuff like that. That was more stressful than actually working with the youth. So having a really good understanding of how the system works, the rules, and I mean, like any other foster parent, I've had you call their worker and say, Alan's abusing me here, beating me, right? They were mad at me. So when they come knocking at your door for a special evaluation, what does that mean? What's your rights? All that stuff has to be available. I was one time licensed by a program that did not have their policies and procedures in place, so I had nothing to go to. So those policies and procedures and kind of rules are so important for a foster parent. The other thing too is just continuous support on, I've learned so much about mental health and substance abuse and medication and, child development. There's just, oh my goodness, I had to be open. I had to be ready to learn so much, right? So having an opportunity, foster parents will tell you what we need. I need to hear more about this. Like, what do you mean my child is schizophrenic? Or what do you mean this child is, is bipolar depression or something like that? Like, those needs, they have to get that information. And we have the internet and stuff, but there's still good old training. I mean, I did see somebody ask about the training, and I don't know where the Center for Tribes, what the contract and stuff allows, but as a partner, I'm assuming, Laura, they can go to NNCTC and see our course offerings and look at some of our course offerings of trainings there, particularly look at in the one under family and youth driven course offerings that talks about that foster parenting curriculum that was developed, and then reach out to us and we'll answer more questions if you want to hear more about those. Is that okay to say that?
It's been said.
Okay.
Yes, no, I think Alan I always hear him refer to that curriculum as his life's work. So we are happy to connect you all with that resource for sure.
Yeah.
So Lisa, question for you. We have youth who are growing up without traditional cultural teachings. How can we educate those youth about their culture and teachings when they're in foster care? Do you have any videos that would be a great resources or other things that might be good resources?
Um, foster homes are a shortage. They're hard to get. I think everyone in this room can agree with that. But working and trying to find foster parents who have the cultural backgrounds or the traditions or teachings that's the goal. That's the unicorn. Kind of like what Alan was talking about, like, when the youth come into his home, they just automatically see. Um, it can be about just infusing, like teachings even in the smallest of things, or even, like around, like the rites of passage, or, like other talking about transitions, like transitioning from like puberty into, like adulthood, and, what are the cultural teachings about that? And um, just always having those conversations and always being approachable, that kids can come and ask questions. If they are in a home where, like the parents may not have that knowledge, I always took it upon myself to bring, to work with the youth in that way, and to be, like that type of resource, or someone, or a mentor, like an auntie or a relative. It was not unusual for me to, because I always wanted to maintain, like the cultural traditions of children and families. But if a child was in care and for whatever reason a parent couldn't bring the child, I would bring the child. Um, or I would arrange for someone else that could come, that could bring them and can kind of supervise, from like a little distance away, just knowing that they're safe. In, like in Indian Child Welfare Act or ICWA cases, I would often hear, I would ask, okay, well, how are you maintaining like cultural traditions or the culture with this family? And sometimes the caseworkers would just say, well, we can't, like for whatever reason. And I would say they would have to. For example, I had a case where, like the family was very traditional, and in Ojibwe country, ceremonies are often done in summer, and it's a very, like June to August is usually like extremely busy. And a grandmother wanted to bring her grandchild who was in care to ceremonies, and the caseworker said, nope, there's no way, because the caseworker didn't feel that, she could supervise. And I explained to the caseworker as an ICWA worker, like, okay, there's no drugs and alcohol allowed. I said there are numerous grandmas around, and in particular, this child's grandma is very well known. She can manage, and they can take, like they'll watch. The child will be safe, supervised. It's, like when we are in ceremony, the whole community that's there watches over each other's children. And I said, there's not a lack of supervision. The child is safe. The child needs to go with grandma. So I would always just push for that as well.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay. So, as we come to the end of our time together, I guess my last question for you all is, what have you gained from being a caseworker? What have you gained from being a foster parent? What have some of your experiences during that time like gifted you?
Okay, I'll start if you don't mind, Lisa. I'll try to be quick here. So again, I'm the Youth and Family Engagement Specialist for NNCTC. Laura did such a wonderful job introducing or mentioning that I come with all this lived experience, and I really did learn that I had to stop blaming and shaming the parents or the biological parents and be part of this great team. The goal was reunification. But bringing their voice and choice into the services that we provide, because they know what works best, right? So as an NCTC's youth and family engagement specialist, I'm all about having foster parents develop training curriculums for foster parents, having parents developing stuff for parents, showing our youth and our parents some of our trainings and asking them for their opinion, right? So getting their opinion on stuff. So yeah, really, really keeping their voice involved in what works, what doesn't work, and understanding that they're truly the ones that know what works and what don't work for their children, kind of thing, So I had that, like I said, I had this opportunity to be a foster parent, and sometimes the caseworkers just didn't get it because they didn't live with the child, You see them one day and this way, they're totally different when, they're going through a certain crisis, right? So you just don't see all those things. So it's really important to really keep them involved in the way we, even to be, now as a foster parent, being a trainer and all that kind of stuff that just empowers them even more. For a biological parent to have raised a child with behavioral health issues, wondering why did I have to have a child with behavioral health issues? There's nothing more empowering than allowing them to be part of a program where they get to talk about their experience to others and train others and let them know, because people need, or foster parents out there need that information. So yeah, I think that's my biggest lesson, is keep them involved. Don't push them away and don't blame them for the child's problems.
Thanks, Alan. And I just wanted to say thank you for all the work that you have done, are doing, and will do. It's quite the rap sheet you have, I think, as influencing the lives of kids and families. So thank you.
Thank you.
Lisa, what about you?
What I have taken away from my time in child welfare is growing as an advocate. I can be a pretty quiet person, but through the years, I've kind of thrown that out the window and just have really learned how to advocate and push in regards of this well-being of our youth and even our families. Tribal families are up against a lot. And just being the person that they can hopefully count on or help them navigate through, the difficult times, that has been really important to me. It's been heartbreaking, but it's been rewarding as well. I just get the ability to love more children, get to know how to support and mentor, more families or growing adults, and hopefully just being like a positive influence and helping everyone transition in a good and healthy way.
Thanks, Lisa. Sounds like in your work to make sure that kids and families have their voice, that and partly they've given you yours there too. Proud to know you as well. So thank you both for doing this this afternoon for everyone. Let me pop up my screen here just real quick. Make sure I get us to the right page. So we just wanted to also thank all of you for participating, but mostly all of you for the work that you're out there doing for kids and families. And I hope that this session has been helpful, that this time together has been helpful, and that you too will reflect on what have your experiences as caseworkers, as foster parents, as providers in whatever capacity that you are. How have your experiences fueled you? What have they gifted you? And again, just thank you for the work that you're out there doing each and every day, and the work that comes home with you each and every day, and in your thoughts and in your prayers. So for more information really about anything trauma-informed practices and tribal child welfare, check out the Tribal Information Exchange website for more information. Feel free to use the links on the page to inquire about additional training and support that might be useful to you or your program. And stay tuned, because we have more of these types of conversations coming and these types of resources, trauma-informed practice strategies for transitions, visitation, and documentation. And just a final thank you. I think Laura Dyer has just dropped a link into the chat box. If you all wouldn't mind clicking on that and participating in a quick survey on whether or not this presentation was helpful to you and what you'd like to hear more about. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're here to support the work that you all are doing. So call us, email us, and click the connect button on our site. And with that, thank you so much, you all.